Hey, everybody out there in Cryptid land. We've got a very, very cool story to tell you today. And we don't have a guest. I'm just going to be giving it to you. Um, my name's Patrick Perry, host of the Cryptid Quest Podcast. Glad you came aboard to watch us today. We're going to be talking about Daniel Boone and his Bigfoot encounter. And he had several other encounters in the woods uh, down around here. He's from, the Ozark area. He's from Kentucky. Um, he lived to be 86 years old. He was born in 1734, died in 1820. Of course, an American icon, a legend. And if anybody out there has any any sort of topics that you'd like me to maybe bring up, research, and discuss on the show, if you have any questions, feel free to send them in to me, and we'll get you on. It's the Cryptid Quest Podcast at gmail.com is our email, or you can get hold of us on Facebook and just send me a message or anything to the Cryptid Quest. That's what we are on Facebook, Cryptid Quest. So, anyways, back to the story. It's not a story that Daniel Boone liked to tell many people. Obviously, at one point, he was at a gathering, and he was up in front of people speaking, and the crowd was asking him to tell about the encounter with this huge hairy man. And of course, as goes in the Bigfoot world, and I guess it even happened back then, there was a guy in the crowd who was heckling him, saying it was nonsense, couldn't have happened. Sound familiar? And Daniel would not tell the story to the people. But one young man had followed him to a smaller gathering, to one of the local shops after the event. And with the smaller group of people that Daniel trusted, he relayed his encounter, which we'll get to in a little bit. Daniel Boone is the one who made the Wilderness Trail famous. He's the one who blazed the path through the Cumberland Gap. It begins near the Potomac River and runs through Virginia down the Shenandoah Valley, Staunton, then to the Holstein River before it continues west to the Cumberland Gap and north, where it ends at the falls of the Ohio River in Louisville, Kentucky. This territory was Indian territory. The Shawnee, the Cherokee, they, owned this land. So when anytime he was traveling through there, he had to deal with, along with everything out there in nature, had to deal with the Indians too. And they weren't real friendly, because most of them weren't real friendly, because basically these guys are showing up in their backyard and they don't like it. And they're trying to make it their backyard. Obviously, you know the story. He and his wife, Rebecca, had 10 children. And while settling these lands, he ended up losing 2 sons and a brother. His brother, Ned, was shot while coming back from a hunting trip with Daniel. And they got into an encounter with the Shawnee. And he got shot and lost his life. His first son, James, was killed during an ambush while traveling through Virginia in 1773 by the Indians. His second son died in the Battle of Blue Licks during the Revolution in 1782. Daniel Boone himself was captured by the Shawnee in 1778. And the chief of the tribe, Chief Blackfish, adopted him as a son. He later escaped and made it back to Boonesboro and warned the people of an impending attack, that the Indians were going to come and attack the town. And luckily he got out of there and escaped, was able to go back and tell them about it before they got there. He also had a very harrowing act of his daughters were both captured. Two of his daughters were captured by the Indians, and Daniel Boone by himself. Well, I don't know that it was by himself, but he went in and he saved them and got them out of captivity. Then eventually Daniel Boone moved to Missouri in 1799, and was living here in the Ozarks, which is pretty cool. All right, now that I've given you the rundown of who Daniel Boone is, just in case you don't know who he is, which I'm sure most of you do, now we're going to get into the story. And oh my gosh, it's such a great encounter. And what I love most about this encounter is the point in time where it took place. Because back then, people really didn't have the want to make up stories, tell crazy things because it's going to make you look crazy. Not like today where you put something on YouTube or whatever and get 1 million views. Back then, you were just crazy, and that was it. So it all started out one morning. They got up, and he noticed that his horses had been stolen by the Indians. Well, Daniel Boone was a hell of a tracker, so he went out. He found sign. There was 2 Indians, to the best of his knowledge, from the way he was looking at the tracks on the ground. So he got one of his sons and decided that they were going to track them down and try to get their horses back. So him and his son, they followed the tracks to the Licking River, and then the tracks went and headed towards the Ohio River. And they followed it down to where the falls were, and that is where the city of Cincinnati, Ohio is today. They found hundreds of Native Americans there. They found their camp, the small camp that the ones who stole the horses had on the one side of the river. And then the next morning they decided to go across. And after they went across, they found upwards of 500 Native Americans all encamped. And they decided this is a foolish mission, because there's no way they're going to be able to succeed 2 against 500. So they had decided to turn back and just go home and losses. So they started heading back, and I'm guessing it was probably probably late spring, maybe early summer, because they said the corn was about thigh high at the time coming up. And they camped one night, made their beds, camped, got up the next morning. They're getting closer to home, but they decided that this one ridge that ran directly back to where their home was, they were going to each take a side of the hill and do some hunting along the way. So he posted his son up on one side and he was on the other side. So that way, as they're walking along, if he shoots, he can hear it and come help, and vice versa. If Daniel shoots, his son will come, and they're within earshot of each other of a gunshot, but they couldn't see each other. So as they're walking, it was about 10 in the morning, Daniel hears a shot. And he hears a second shot. Well, Daniel figured he might have ran into a bear or a mountain lion, and that's why there was 2 shots, because he said the second shot he could tell by the sound that he didn't load his gun properly. It was a emergency quick shot. So something was probably attacking his son. So he made it over to his area about as quick as he could. Well, Daniel comes up over the hill and sees at about 250 yards, his son is behind a tree trying to load his gun again. And he sees this creature, huge, said it was the biggest man he ever saw. And the creature is about 75 yards away from his son and heading towards him really fast. And his son's behind a tree trying to get his gun loaded again. Daniel tried to get a bead on this creature, but there were so many trees, and he said it was moving so fast that he couldn't get a bead on it. And as it got closer to his son, he was afraid, well, he might end up shooting his son too. Well, the creature got to his son and with one hand grabbed his son by his shirt collar. The other hand grabbed the gun away from his son, smashed it against a tree and destroyed his gun, then took him by the pants and the shirt and then slammed him to the ground. He said Daniel was still trying to get a bead on this thing, trying to get a shot. Well, the creature picked his son up again, slammed him down again. And by this time, Daniel said he didn't know if his son was alive or dead. He wasn't moving. And he's like, well, if he's alive, he's not going to be for long, because if this creature gets a third slam on him, he's probably not going to live through that. So Daniel took the best aim he could and took the shot. Well, the creature dropped. As soon as he shot, it dropped. So he made his way down to his son. His son was unconscious, barely alive. He started giving him water. Said it took him about an hour before his son finally started coming back to his senses. So they started looking at this creature, and Daniel noticed that when his son shot, he hit it by the right nipple, and both bullets were about 2 inches away, which should have been a kill shot. So Daniel started inspecting the creature. Well, he said when he stuck his finger in the bullet hole, he just felt solid. Everything was solid inside of there. So he cut the creature open, and instead of having ribs with spaces in between like humans, this thing had it was solid. And I think he said it was about 3/4 of an inch thick of just solid bone, like a breastplate. And that's why the bullets didn't really have much effect. And actually, if that's the way these things are built, maybe that's why there's so many stories today about how these creatures get shot, but nothing ever seems to happen to them. But luckily, as he inspected the body more, he noticed that when he shot it directly through the eye, which is probably the only reason he killed it. And my goodness, he must have been a hell of a shot. I'd hate to be on the other side of his gun barrel at any point and at any distance if he was that good of a shot, which I'm sure he was. You know, back then you lived and died by your gun. So then they said that the creature had like yellowish skin and long blondish yellowish hair, covering its entire body. They went to measure it and they used their Kentucky rifles, which were about a 5 foot long rifle. They laid it next to the body to check the height. Well, it was 2 guns plus. And so Daniel estimated that the creature was 10.5 foot tall, which is immense. That's immense. A 10.5 foot tall, hairy, bipedal creature. And he didn't know what this creature was, didn't have a name for it. So he basically pinned a name on it. Daniel Boone liked to read, and from the book Gulliver's Travels, he pinned the name Yahoo. Apparently, Yahoo was one of the characters in the book, so that's what he named the creature. And later on, after he got back to civilization, and like I said, there were some friendly Native Americans out there, and he was friends with some. He discussed with these Native Americans about this creature, and the Native Americans told him that they were like another people to them. And years ago, there were many, many, many of them, and they lived alongside with each other. Um, but the numbers were decreasing. They weren't seeing them as much. But the Native Americans told them that they were an actual being out there in this world. And the Cherokee had a name, and they called it. Let's see if I can say this right. Sol Kalu was the name that the Cherokee had pinned on this creature. And this meant, in their language, sloping giant, which to me makes a lot of sense because obviously people say that they walk with a forward lean. And even in the Patty film, the famous pose, is kind of leaning forward. So that makes sense to be called a sloping giant, and they were obviously giants. And Daniel did not, like I said, Daniel did not like telling this story to people because it made him seem crazy, and he just didn't want to be pinned at that as crazy guy. But he also said that this actually did happen to him and his son. Daniel Boone also ran around the Ozarks a lot. And like I said, he ended up moving to Missouri at one point. So Daniel Boone, lived in the Ozarks, and apparently he had a couple encounters with a creature that they call the Ozark Howler. And the Ozark Howler, if you don't know what it is, some say it's the size of a bear. Some say it's the size of a wolf. They describe it as a cat. They describe it as a lot of things. But the one thing that they always say, is consistent is it has a very loud screeching howl. It has horns on its head, and it has glowing red eyes. And as far as the scream, man, I could attribute that to a Bigfoot. The glowing red eyes, you can also attribute that to a Bigfoot. The horns, maybe mistaken identity with branches and stuff in the background. I'm not 100% sure. Um, I tend to think that the Ozark Howler might be a lot of misidentification, but then again, I don't know. There might be an actual Ozark Howler running around out there. But Daniel Boone did say he had a couple of encounters with these things. So the first one took place along the Platte River which is a tributary to the Missouri River. And Daniel Boone said this thing was about the size of a bear, had a horrible scream to it, and he said that he shot at it, hit it, but it didn't take it down. The beast ran off. So, he as good a shot as he is, I'd say if he hit this thing and it got away, it must be pretty damn tough. Because if you can take down a Bigfoot, you're tough. And Daniel Boone was tougher than just about everything out there. The second time Daniel Boone had an encounter with an Ozark howler took place at a area that I'm familiar with this town. It took place north of what would be considered, well, what is Cuba today. Cuba, Missouri, right in the center of Missouri. He had another encounter with one of these beasts. He wrote in a letter to his sister. But this time he shot it and killed it. And like I said, he said it was about the size of a bear, had long, shaggy hair, and he didn't mention that I know of the horns or anything in his report on it, but he did call it the Ozark howler. So there's not a lot of details on his Ozark howler encounters, but I tend to believe if he shot something he didn't know what it was, then it kind of lends a little credence that there's something else out there that we don't know about. Because obviously, the Bigfoot called this thing a Yahoo, so they apparently were not the same creature. But and I know the different creatures. And a lot of people, and when I say I think there's a lot of mistaken identity with the Ozark howler, I'm just saying with the quick, views or what they're hearing, I think a lot of that could be attributed to Bigfoot. Um, but I'm not going to discount Daniel Boone saying that that's what this was, because smart man, I don't think that he would what he called a yacht. He left as an Ozark howler. Interesting encounters from old Daniel. And so then real quick, I'm going to go ahead and add on a little more. And this doesn't have to do with Daniel Boone. This still has to do with ancient Bigfoot reportings. There's another famous explorer, and it always seems to be the explorers that run into these things. There was a Viking by the name of Leif Erikson, came to America, landed on the shores, and he says that the first thing that his men had run across as soon as their ships landed were these huge, hairy, smelly men that came from the wood line, and they were throwing things at him. And he said they were 10 foot tall, covered in hair, screeching, smelled bad. And this is the first thing that his men encountered when they got on shore, and these things came out of the woods. So it obviously large, covered in hair, doesn't sound like it was Native Americans. And as before, when Daniel was talking to the Native Americans about it, they said there used to be a lot more of these things out there. And I think that's exactly what Leif Erikson ran into too. So, I'm just saying, there's a lot of things out in these woods. There used to be a lot more of these things out in these woods, but it's a little more credence to what we're trying to say is a creature that lives in our woods. I know they're still out there. I've had an encounter. Um, Back then, people were seeing them. They didn't know what to call them, and they were having encounters as far back as history goes. There's a reason every Native American tribe has a word or knowledge of these things because they're out there. They are out there. Um, I don't know how else to put it other than I think that's your biggest proof right there beyond the Patty film is the people that knew these lands inside and out because they lived here. They lived in those woods. They were in those woods every day. Not like today, because today, unless you're an actual outdoorsman and you're out there all the time or a mountain man living out there, most people are just glued to their damn phones and glued to things like this, computer, TV. We don't get out in the woods as much as we should, and we're not encountering these things. But I guarantee, and I know they're still out there. We don't live as one with nature like the Indians do. And that's another thing that Daniel Boone had said when he talked to the Native Americans about it. They said that Native Americans would live as one with these things because they all lived in the same place. And I guess you just had to learn how to get along, especially if you're up against something that's 20 times stronger than you and 3, 4 times your size. I think you want to get along with it the best you could. Even though there are a lot of encounters and stories about ones that weren't so nice, uh, kind of like the Lovelock Cave story, where supposedly these red-headed giants, which I think might have been Bigfoot. I also think that might have been Bigfoot, but maybe not because they did find large sandals in the cave. But they trapped these things in a cave and then lit a fire and forced them out and killed them because these things were going in and abducting Native American women and children and eating them. Uh, so the Native Americans, even though they get along with some, I guess some they weren't getting along with because they were different. And I think that goes a lot today. You get different encounter stories too. Some come across as very aggressive. Others come across as very friendly or just, maybe not friendly, but hey, you stay over there, I want to stay over here, and we're going to get along kind of way of doing it. But then again, you still have your encounters where they're very aggressive and they come in and, you know, they just kind of do what they want. And I imagine anybody that's been attacked by a Bigfoot, you're not going to hear about the story because if you're attacked by a Bigfoot, you're probably not going to live to tell about it. The ones that make it away are the stories we hear about. So generally, you think that Bigfoot can't be killers or aren't killers. Well, I'm not saying they are or aren't, but I think just kind of like humans, you're going to have good ones, you're going to have bad ones. You know, it would never cross my mind to go out and harm a human being or anything for that matter, unless I'm actually hunting and going to eat it for food. But other humans, it excites them to do bad things to people. And I imagine since, and I don't know for a fact how much alike we are, but it seems like Bigfoot and humans are a lot alike. So you're going to have crazy ones that minds don't work right, and you're going to have others that are okay. And a lot has to do with it, with the Native Americans talking about how big their population was way back when. It seems like there's, it, even they said it seemed like their population had shrunk. And if you have a big population decrease like that, you're also going to have the chance of interbreeding. Uh, uh, and that's not good for the population, because when that happens, a lot of times it causes defects, and it can cause defects in your brain too, which might make you act differently and do different things that a normal person wouldn't, because you got your wiring all screwed up in your head. So, be careful when you're out there in the woods. I think there are some of these bad ones out there. I think there's a lot more of the good ones, but there are some of these bad ones. So, and it just goes along with the different encounters you hear, um, which 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 way it's going to go. And luckily, most people either encounter the ones that just are standoffish, or they're aggressive, but they're not like trying to kill you aggressive. And I think the ones that are aggressive and trying to get you, well, they done got you before you know you've been got. So that's about all I got on this topic today. I wanted to share that story with you. I don't know how many people have heard about it. I also uh, heard that I think Lewis and Clark encountered a Bigfoot as well at some point. Um, so Lewis and Clark, two more adventurers, explorers. Um, Everybody knows the Lewis and Clark Trail, I would imagine. Well, they also had encounters early 1800s with some very, very strange things. They reported that during their expedition, there were howls and screams and growls in the night when they would camp. And at points in time, it almost sounded like people were talking in the woods, which might be the samurai chatter that people talk about today. Uh, One night, they were in their camp and they could hear the creature right outside the camp. They went to pursue to see what it was, and when they came back to their camp had been destroyed. Uh, Food had been taken, some of it eaten, their blankets had been torn to shreds. And they were very, very nervous about this, because now they thought something had been following them through the woods as they were going on their expedition and traveling. So the next morning, as they were going, they came upon a clearing, and they saw what they described as a 10-foot tall, hairy creature that was standing in an opening. It didn't notice them, but they saw it, and they said it was bipedal, humanoid, covered in hair. The creature didn't notice them, like I said, and then turned around and wandered back into the woods. Well, as they continued their expedition, they were hearing from many of the Native Americans about this giant of the woods, the ruler of the woods, and it was the Forest King. So they kept going on their journey. And I think it was more towards the end of their journey, they had another encounter with what I could only imagine would have been a Bigfoot, because they said they ran across a path of destruction where trees were uprooted, things were messed up, and they followed this because they wanted to find out what was doing this. Well, they eventually came across the creature, and this time they described it as covered in dark black hair. They said it had self illuminating, glowing red eyes. They said it screamed and howled, and they said this one was 12 foot tall. It actually came at them and knocked them to the ground, but they were able to get up and escape. They eventually got back to the river, got in a canoe, and got away from there. So I think this is like an example of one of the creatures, like I said before, that not intending to kill them, but does not want them in their territory. So just got them out of there, because at 12 foot tall and already knocked them down, I guarantee if that thing wanted to kill them, they would have been dead. I don't think they would have stood a chance. So, and then when they got back to civilization and they tried to talk about their encounters out there, of course, just like today, everybody said they're crazy and nobody wanted to hear it. So, if you look back at these stories and these encounters, well, I don't want to call them stories, encounters, uh, it kind of reflects on what goes on today when people see these things and people call them crazy, but you know what you saw, you know what you encountered, but just because somebody else wasn't there with you and they don't believe, then you're crazy. You're making stuff up, which you're not. And that drives me. I'm sorry, but that drives me, because I've gone through the same ridicules. I'm sure a lot of you out there that have had encounters have gone through it, and a lot of you that just, even though you haven't had an encounter, just for believing, you get ridiculed, and I think that's wrong. Uh, but that's just the way the world is, and I think it lends a lot of credence and a lot of value to people today that have encounters, that these icons, icons of history and of America and of the woods, they've encountered these things. They've seen them. They've survived them to come and talk about it. And the world still treated them like that as they do to us today. But I put a lot of faith in what these guys had to say, because they had no reason to lie. I mean, they had amazing encounters and stories without a Bigfoot in it. I mean, bears, panthers, everything else out there in the woods. They had these harrowing tales of all these encounters with these other things. Why did they have to make this stuff up? You know, I and I 100% believe they didn't make it up. They actually saw these things back then, and I'm glad they're a little shorter nowadays. Because if I saw something 12 foot tall in the woods, I think I'd have had a heart attack before I would have even been able to run away. So 8 foot is bad enough. I couldn't imagine 12. You know, you look at your wall and imagine 8 foot. Imagine your wall and then 4 foot above that. No, thank you. I'm out. So I just wanted to share these stories with you guys today. I know it's not my typical podcast, but I had a good time talking about it. I've wanted to talk about these stories because it really intrigued me. Um, I know I also said it was about Daniel Boone, which I started with Daniel Boone, but these other stories all kind of tie in with it. So I think my made a nice little trilogy, even though I didn't go much into the Leif Erikson story. I think it still makes a nice little trilogy of, hey, this happened to all these guys and it's still happening today. So keep your minds open and your eyes open and your ears open when you're out there in the woods. Maybe you'll have an encounter too. Maybe. Uh, maybe you want one, maybe you don't. But I do. And I'm sure a lot of you do too. So thanks for joining us tonight on the Cryptid Quest Podcast, everybody. From me and my buddy Dirty, keep it creepy.
Yeah, out in the woods where the shadows creep, I'm trying to find the legend that the people keep. Bigfoot's the name, got a story to tell. Footprints in the mud, can't you hear the bell? Whispers in the night, can you feel that chill? Bigfoot on the run, he's a legend, keep it real. Bigfoot, yeah, he's the talk of the town. Creeping through the trees, never wearing a frown. Legend of the forest, he's got a big stride. As the trap beats thump, you know he's got pride. Like I'm on a quest, searching for the homie, you know he's the best. Got my camera ready, heightened senses on blast. Snap a shot of Sasquatch, legend unsurpassed. Eyes in the dark, you can't catch what you can't see. King of the woods, living wild and free. Bigfoot, yeah, he's the talk of the town. Creeping through the trees, never wearing a frown. Legend of the forest, he's got a big stride. As the trap beats thump, you know he's got pride.